There's a couple things that hit me in this last general conference really hard. I think what hit me the hardest was President Oaks talking about the boarding house. The home is the boarding house. And that is something that I think about a lot. And I think that's the perfect way to describe the modern family problem. And basically, the way that I see it is, the way what he described is that there are opportunities to distract with electronics indefinitely. And the children don't mind being distracted by electronics, mostly because it's easy. And the parents don't mind that the children are distracted by electronics, mostly because it's easy. And neither one of them really want that, meaning like their hearts don't want that situation, but it's the easy situation, so they default to that. And I've had a few parents come up to me and say, I need help with my kids and electronics. And every single time I make suggestions, do all this different stuff, and it never works because the children go through withdrawals when you take their electronics away, when you restrict their electronics, and they get mad, violent, and the parents don't want to deal with it. Like, oh, it'll just be easier to go back to the way things were. And they view that as them doing their kids a favor, like giving their kids what they want. And President Oak says what they really want is time with their family. And that's true, but they won't say that. The kids will say, I don't want time with my family. I want my phone back. And the parents will say, well, in order to be a good parent, I'm going to go ahead and do what the kids want because they don't actually want time with their family. And it's not true. The kids do want times with their family. They just don't know how to express it. And even if they don't want it, what they need is time with their family, whether they want it or not. And so there's a lot of families that find themselves in this really heart-wrenching situation where they get stuck. It's just an addictive cycle and they get stuck. And most parents know that there is a problem. Most parents don't think they have a big problem. There's a few that know it's a big problem. But most parents know that they have a problem. They'd like to do less electronics, but it's just too hard. It's so hard. And there's a few things that I've done to really help, which I'll mention in a second. But before the electronics, before I pass the electronics conversation, the same thing happens when you don't have electronics and you distract with other things. And a lot of times it's school or sports or work. There's tons of other things that this happens. So this happened when I was a kid. My family was one of those that did very little electronic. We had an N64, but it was pretty strict times when we could play it. There was a TV, no cable. There was pretty strict times when we could watch it. And so we spent a lot of time outside, and I would do school and sports. And during my teenage years, I was not in the house at all because I was doing other stuff. And so my house became a boarding house where I was able to leave 6:30 in the morning, come back at about 8 p.m., eat, sleep, repeat. And it was justified because I'm out of my parents' hair. They don't have to worry about me. I'm doing quote unquote good stuff, sports, activities, school, whatever, mutual, church. Great. Nobody would think that was a problem. But it's the same exact situation. It's same detriment to the family. It just doesn't have the face of addiction like the electronics do. The electronics stimulate and addict in a very measurable way, where things like football don't. So there's different ways to have the boarding house problem, but all in all, it's a time with the family problem. There's really not much time spent as a family. And so I get comments, not very often, but I used to get them a lot. I used to get a lot of comments when my kids were younger about, wow, your kids, do so well and they're so different. They act different, respectfully and all this different stuff. And I always knew it was because they spent more time with us. We homeschool, and so we're just together all the time. And it really helps the kids be good attentive, responsible kids. And I know it's really hard to pull the plug on the electronics and distract. And so most parents don't, and they basically white knuckle it to the 18th birthday. And then after the kids are out of the house, they get kind of surprised when their kids blow them off for like 5 or 10 years because they never had that connection. And hopefully after 5 or 10 years, they're like, oh, I guess there is some value in this family relationship, but it's it's rough. It's rough. I've seen a lot of kids just leave the house and they just don't see a reason to go back. Like there's somebody I met the other day who left home, and he said, yeah, I haven't talked to my family in like 10 years. And I was like, really? What happened? He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, why haven't you talked to him? He's like, I don't know. Just haven't talked to him. And I'm like, so there's no rift? Like you just stop talking to him. And he was like, yeah, we just don't really have a reason to talk. And I imagine that was true when he was at home. So he's just carrying on the habits, the practices when he was home to when now he's out of the house. And that happened so much so that his family at one point sought him out to see if he was still alive or not because they heard a rumor that he had passed. And he was fine. But yeah, I think it's so hard not to fall into that trap. And the recommendations that I have basically are starting with the young kids. If you have a teenager, like a 14-year-old, and you're like, I'm going to turn this family around, and your child's 14, good luck. I really don't have a good strategy for you. Like that's basically an addiction rehab situation, and it's going to be 6 months to a year of absolute torture to detox from all of the garbage. So good luck with that. When you have a young kid, it does help to establish, rules and boundaries and stuff. And one of the things that helped, we in our family, we talk a lot about begging, because the kids will start begging for electronics. Please, please, can we watch a movie? Please, please, please. And so we don't beat around the bush. We say very clearly, like, we're not watching a movie today. And if they'll say it again, and I'll say, if you ask again, I will say no. And that helps them a lot. It helps them a lot know that in the future, there's not like this false hope that I'm going to get my way if I beg. I'll say, if you continue to beg, I will say no. And then if they continue to do it, then there's consequences, right? Like, okay, obviously there's a problem, so let's do this. Let's do no movies for the rest of the week. Does that work? Does that kind of like calm your nerves, your anxieties about whether or not you're going to see a movie? Because oftentimes they're asking because they're afraid they're not going to watch a movie like for the rest of their life. And if that doesn't help, then the consequences increase, and eventually you can tell them they start to realize what's happening, because they're when they do that, they're breaking trust. Like it's not, you're not entering into a responsible relationship with me, so I have no reason to trust you with a movie if you're going to be begging for a movie like that. It's not something I'm interested in. And so as the consequences increase, you can see their chemicals start to flip, where the addiction response of like, I need this, please, 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 please. And all of a sudden they realize, oh, they're not going to get this, and they're not going to get it for a long time, because their brains are being overrun by these chemicals. All of a sudden their brains go whoosh, and they just kind of like stop, and they kind of shut down, and they're like, oh, I actually have to find something else to do with my time. Like, I cannot obsess about this because it's not going to happen. And they do. They don't throw a tantrum. They don't get violent. They don't start screaming and stuff. And it's because we've helped them turn their brain around and realize they don't actually need to be dependent on those thoughts. Whatever the fear is driving them to beg for a movie. And that's really helpful, but it takes a long time, and it's a lot easier to start when they're young, but we still do it. I mean, my kids are not necessarily that young anymore, but they still beg for electronics when they think that they have a chance. And so we have to kind of enter into that correctional process again, and then pretty quickly they, they're out of it. And then like 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, they'll slip back into it because something triggered them, and they're like this. The typical trigger is that they go with a friend and they're hanging out with their friend doing well, and all of a sudden their friend is watching videos on YouTube for like 10 minutes, and that's enough. 10 minutes of their friend watching YouTube on a phone, and usually it's like a motorcycle video or something. Like recently I was showing them Ronnie Mac. So I show them Ronnie Mac. The kids get like crazy excited, like Ronnie Mac's the best thing ever. He's hilarious. He's like a clown on a motorcycle. And so then after that, for like an hour, they're like, please, 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 can we watch more? Can we watch more? Can we watch more? And I'm like, we're not watching any more today. If you ask again, we won't watch any more for the rest of the week. And that, just like that, helps them like switch their chemicals, get control of their thoughts, and realize I've got to do something else with my time, or else I'm going to dig myself a hole that I'm really going to be upset about. So yeah, those are my thoughts. The boarding house thing, I'm like, I struggle to think of a family that is not in a boarding house situation. And it's heartbreaking because I love spending time with my family, my kids. I always wanted to be a dad. And so it's hard for me to stomach the thought that there's dads out there that would just rather their kids go away. Like, I don't know, it's just crazy to me. But I get it. You have a project and you want the kids to go away so you can finish the project, and then you take that, rinse and repeat, and eventually you've got this habit of just like, get out of my face, go away. So I get it, but it's nowhere to live, man. It's just setting yourself up for misery. It's sad.